Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Small Obtainable Goals. I'm Sean, and today I wanted to do a top 5 mental health depictions in television, but because I half-assed everything in life and in this, apparently, it's kind of turned into a 2.5 best. So let's get into it. The first show I want to talk about is Young Justice and their depiction of depression. There are spoilers ahead for a bunch of shows, so you've been warned. But for those of you who don't know, who aren't nerds, Young Justice is a DC show that premiered on Cartoon Network like over a decade ago. And then it got 2 seasons that were amazing. Then it got canceled. Then it got brought back onto a defunct channel that DC had, that was like their own app. And that went under. And then it ended up on HBO Max, and right now it is kind of in limbo, but it's an amazing series. You should definitely check it out and just binge watch the entire series because it's amazing. And yeah, especially season 4. Oh, and Young Justice, the season 4, Superboy, one of the main characters, dies. Put air quotes around that because if anybody in here is a nerd, then they know that no one really dies in comics except for Uncle Ben. He's the only one who's not allowed to come back. It's a cruel world for Uncle Ben. But, Peter can't be happy. So, sorry, Spider-Man. But yeah. So, Superboy dies at the beginning of season 4. Then Beast Boy, one of his best friends, and his brother-in-law later on, gets super depressed and starts sleeping all the time, and then starts taking sleeping pills to sleep more because he doesn't want to do anything else. And the whole entire season was just showing Beast Boy spiraling into a depressive episode, and it was done beautifully, accurately, I should say, because it wasn't really beautiful. It's actually super upsetting to watch someone do that. First, he stopped showing interest in a lot of things and he was sad. And then he just slowly, gradually pushed everyone around him away and eventually got to the point where he was taking drugs to go to sleep just because basically sleep is a good getaway from depression because you can't be super depressed when you're asleep. And yeah, I've done that myself personally. So there's that. The main thing that was really shown well is how Beast Boy starts to struggle and starts to distance himself from his friends and family, but also how a lot of people don't notice it happening at first. Um, his his girlfriend at the time in the series is trying to tell someone that, look, something's wrong with him. He's very upset. He's very depressed. He's very not himself. And everyone around him just says, well, he lost his best friend, his brother. And how's he supposed to feel? Of course he feels that way. When in reality, there is definitely a difference between feeling sad from someone from like loss and dealing with it to being majorly depressed because of that loss. One of the best things in that episode is that they show how he deals with it how he deals with the loss in an unhealthy way. There are healthy ways and unhealthy ways to deal with loss, and taking drugs to constantly sleep all the time and refusing to talk about it with others is not a healthy way to handle loss. It's very unhealthy because you can't get better unless you talk about it. The next 2 shows that I want to talk about are basically honorable mentions. Elementary. It was on CBS, and it starred Johnny Lee Miller and Lucy Liu as Sherlock Holmes and Joan Watson. It was a Sherlock Holmes series, so I loved it because I'm a huge Sherlock nerd. Elementary shows a really grounded and realistic portrayal of how people deal with addiction. And I've personally never dealt with addiction, but I've known people who have, and I've had family members who have dealt with it. And even they really just complimented the portrayal. It also shows the struggles that come with it, all the subsequent things that happen in the show. Um, how he becomes hyper fixated on work because he doesn't want to think about drugs, or how he does other seemingly odd things um, to avoid dealing with his addiction. And they also show that taking the steps to deal with addiction helps. Now, I, like I said, I've never dealt with addiction. So I just wanted to just put it in there. This list is like an honorable mention. The next show I want to talk about is The Last of Us. I know what you're thinking. I watched that. It was amazing. And I don't remember there being a lot of mental health talk about in it. And that's true. But throughout the series, especially towards the end episodes of the season, they showed Joel having panic attacks a couple times, and it's not directly called a panic attack, and it makes sense because it's been an apocalyptic world. So when you're dealing with a zombie fungi, you're probably not going to also talk about your panic attacks or how your mental health is, because everyone's just assuming that your mental health is terrible because the world is over. And that makes sense. But in the shows, especially when you see Joel going around and he's starting to like almost clutch his chest and he kind of thinks that he's having a heart attack. It's like implied that he's having one, but he starts to hear ringing in his ears and he can't really catch his breath. That's him having panic attacks. And they did an interview. I forget what the article was, but the director basically confirmed that, yeah, no, he's having panic attacks. So I thought that was a pretty cool portrayal. And I also liked how they didn't acknowledge it, that he was having a panic attack, because in this world, they wouldn't really know what a panic attack was, because the apocalypse happened over 20 years ago. And I think it happened in like 2003 in the series. So the world kind of shut down in 2003. So for the next 20 years, people were just dealing with zombies and stuff. So the mental health profession and mental health knowledge didn't really progress the way it did in our world, thankfully. The last show I want to talk about is Scrubs. And this episode in particular, where Michael J. Fox plays a doctor with OCD, this is what actually made me think to create this episode. And I want to do a whole series on it, or just a whole long form video on it. And I said, hey, I should probably rewatch this. It's been a few years since I've watched it. And I did rewatch it, and that is the next show I want to talk about is Scrubs. This was actually the show that made me think, oh, I should do a whole episode on this and, just talk about how great the portrayal of OCD is in it. So it's been years since I watched the show in its entirety again. So I said, you know what? I'll go back and I'll rewatch the episodes that Michael J. Fox is in, where he plays a doctor with OCD. So I went back and I rewatched them. It was just 2 episodes. And in the episodes, they did a great job showcasing OCD and how it can be, a big struggle and how it can affect your daily life. But then they also did something really, really, let's just like, for lack of a better word, cringy. And I kind of had to redo the whole idea for the video because of that. So the episode with Dr. Kevin Casey, who's played by Michael J. Fox, is fantastic in the depiction of OCD. It shows how he can have strange tics and how it can really like affect his life. There's one point where he just keeps entering the hospital on the first day, and everyone's like, oh, wow, he's a rock star. But really, in his mind, he's just trying to get through the door in a certain way that feels right for his brain, but he can't do it. So he's just basically walking in and out of the hospital several times before he can actually start his day. They also show he becomes obsessed with things and how it can be almost beneficial for him because he got a nervous tick one day about how, he had to reread his textbooks or something bad would happen. So he reread all of his textbooks several times, and he's just this huge encyclopedia of knowledge because he kept reading the books over and over and over and over again because he got obsessed with it. Then it also shows how debilitating it can be when he's washing his hands after surgery. He did this amazing job in surgery. He was the fastest person to ever do this, this one thing. And Dr. Turk was doing it too, and he thought he was the fastest, but then this guy came in and smoked him. But then JD goes and finds him, and it's been hours since his last surgery, but he's still washing his hands, and he's just screaming and just enraged because he can't get his brain to tell him like, oh, your hands are clean, they're good. But JD walked into it thinking, oh, he's an amazing doctor, I'm gonna go give him a piece of my mind because he showed him up at one point. But then he realizes, oh wow, this guy's really struggling. He's having a horrible day, and it's because he's just washing his hands and he can't get his hands right, and it's driving him nuts. So that shows, and that the most realistic portrayal of OCD I've ever seen. There were times when I would literally wash my hands until they were bleeding because it just didn't feel right, or the temperature of the water wasn't right, or just something stupid. And thank God for medication. That's all I can say. That all being said, the portrayal of Ted and his depression is very cringeworthy in this episode and the next. For those of you who watch and might not remember, who watched Scrubs, Ted was he was the lawyer, but he was basically treated like a secretary by the head doctor at the hospital, and Dr. Kelso. And it's honestly hard to talk about. So in the episode, he's incredibly depressed, and he's even suicidal, and he's telling people this. He's not asking for help directly, like, hello, I need help, but he's making a lot of red flag warnings, and just saying a lot of things that like medical professionals should definitely see through and should definitely know, like, oh, something's up. And at one point he even jumps off the roof, but he's falling and he lands in a pile of garbage, because there was another subplot where the janitors were taking out garbage and throwing it on the roof to, hide it. So he falls into a pile of trash, and as he's falling, you can literally hear him say, "Sweet relief," and you can see this just almost calmness wash over him, and he's happy that he thinks that he's going to die, and he lands in the trash, and the head doctor comes out and just says, "Get back to work," to him. And even though this man just attempted to take his own life, and he tells him to get back to work, and the janitors just look at him and go, "Oh, why'd you jump off over here? You should have done it over there. You would get a better result," so to speak. And then he's like, "I can't even do this right." And it's just played up for laughs, and it's just absolutely just tragic to watch now. I mean, it's been probably like almost 20 years since this episode came out, and it's still just really just kind of upsetting to watch. And I mean, I'm sure back in the day when I watched it for the first time, I was like, "Oh yeah, that's funny." Ha ha ha. But knowing everything that I know now and dealing with everything that I went through now, I'm just like, oh my God, why the hell won't these people help him? Especially because they're supposed to be medical professionals. So they should know, hey, this guy constantly talks about killing himself. Maybe he needs help. Thank you for watching Small Obtainable Goals. Hopefully this helped you in some way or another, or it can, help somebody that you know. If you're having trouble, call 988. That's the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, and they'll, hook you up with somebody who can help you in your local area. It's all free. So, take advantage of it. And yeah, like, comment, subscribe, or don't, whatever makes you happy. I'm Sean. This is my sister,
I'm
Kirsten.
Kirsten.
Yeah. You've ruined it. All right. Thanks, everybody.
And cut.